Well, now we come to the most recent entry in the Terminator franchise. I've decided not to look at the TV series The Sarah Connor Chronicles. Why?
Because it's dull, you twit!
Yeah, while I don't think the show is terrible, I just found it very hard to get into and found too many flaws that prevented me from sticking around until the end. Terminator Salvation just sounded more interesting to me, at least on paper. While I may not have agreed with the decision to continue the series after the second film, as a fan, I was curious when it was announced that this fourth movie would abandon the formula of its predecessors and tell a new story set in the post-apocalyptic future that we had only seen glimpses of up to this point. In hindsight, I probably should have taken it as a warning when I heard that the director of Charlie's Angels would be helming this one. The film picks up in the year 2018, 15 years after Judgment Day and 11 years before the time displacement technology was first used. The human resistance is at war with Skynet and its machines. John Connor, who was prophesized to lead the resistance to victory, is taking orders from his superior officers and encouraging his fellow humans, via radio, to stay alive and fight Skynet's forces. His most important goal is to find Kyle Reese, a teenager who will eventually grow into the soldier who travels through time in the first film. I don't need to tell you why John Connor wants to find Kyle Reese, especially if you've seen the first film. Suddenly, a mysterious man appears seemingly out of nowhere. This is Marcus Wright, a convict who was executed and donated his body to science just before Judgment Day. Now lost in this barren future, he soon becomes tied not only to the Resistance, but to Skynet as well. Let's start with the acting. Christian Bale takes over from Nick Stahl as John Connor, bringing a gravelly authority to the hardened leader. The conclusion that some will jump to is that he does his raspy Batman voice, but I honestly think he sounds more akin to Clint Eastwood. While he doesn't feel quite as natural as Edward Furlong or Nick Stahl, he does manage to put his own stamp on the character. However, contrary to what you might guess, he's actually not the main protagonist. The one we follow is Sam Worthington as Marcus. Like him, we are thrown into this unfamiliar setting. He serves as the audience proxy, whose eyes we experience the movie through. Although limited as an actor, Worthington is fairly suited to action-based roles like this. He gives a relatable and personable performance while also pulling off a number of stunts pretty well. Granted, he screams like an ape a little too often, but for the most part, he knows how to channel that almost primal attitude of his character. Faring less well are the supporting characters, which are disappointingly weak. I've heard that Common is better in the show Hell on Wheels, but he is just so flat and boring here that he fails to leave an impression even as a background character. Taking over the role of Kate from Claire Danes is Bryce Dallas Howard, who also does nothing. She exists solely to provide moral support for John. She does this well, but you can't help feeling that she should have gotten more to do given how prominent the character was in the third movie. The most memorable female character is Blair Williams, played by Moon Bloodgood, who makes for a decent action heroine, if a little dull at points. Michael Ironside is unfortunately wasted on a cardboard cutout military character, but hey, Helena Bonham Carter is fine in her 10 minutes of screen time. The weakness lies in Anton Yelchin as Kyle Reese, who is an annoying little twerp. Yelchin tries to bring some of Michael Biehn's mannerisms and acting style to this younger version, but he's not written as a very strong character in this one, always acting tougher than he really is. With him is Jada Grace Berry as Star, a mute companion of Kyle's, who is supposed to appeal to us in the same way as Newt from Aliens. This doesn't work for two reasons. A, this girl is terrible. B, Aliens used the character of Newt to form the emotional core of the film by having her gradually develop a relationship with Ripley. Here, she is already well acquainted with Kyle and never bonds with any other character besides Marcus, briefly, so we don't see any such growth. The 2 minutes of Linda Hamilton via tape recording were more interesting than her. In spite of these detriments, the film does possess some pretty entertaining action scenes. They put you right in close with the characters without necessarily shaking the camera too much. Many of the effects feel gritty and practical, with the use of CGI being surprisingly limited for the time that this movie was made. When CGI is utilized, it's fairly impressive. like when we see the digital recreation of Arnold Schwarzenegger. While it can be seen as pandering by some, I thought it was a nice callback and a fine climax to the origin of the T-800 explored throughout the movie. Speaking of which, we get to see more Terminators in this film. It was interesting to see how different machines were equipped for different tasks, such as the motorcycle Terminators being sent out for highway chases. I liked seeing the T-600s and how they differed from the T-800s that we all know. From a technical standpoint, the movie does manage to impress on several fronts. There are also some intriguing story ideas here, such as Skynet harvesting human prisoners to realistically create skin for the T-800. This could have led to a Planet of the Apes style series of scenes where the machines were experimenting on the prisoners, but they probably could not have gotten away with that in a PG-13 movie. That is part of the problem. I get the feeling that they could have gone farther with some of this imagery had the film been rated R. Granted, the R-rated cut on Blu-ray is better, but it doesn't fix the narrative problems that plague the movie. The dialogue feels forced at times, and the plot is often fragmented. The music is perhaps the weakest it's ever been. Denny Elfman is a talented composer, but his loud and chaotic approach to this score just doesn't resonate as strongly as Brad Fiedel's more simplistic themes. In fact, the music in the game is better than the music in the actual movie. Just listen. Overall, while Terminator Salvation is predominantly a loud, gritty action flick, it tries to get back to the series' roots, with varying degrees of success. It's a very mixed package, sporting decent performances, admirable effects, reasonably exciting action scenes, and a bleak tone that suits the post-apocalyptic setting. However, the characters and music are both a downgrade, the dialogue is hit or miss, the story is not as smooth, and the script ultimately has a hard time conveying the deeper messages and thought-provoking themes of the previous films.